Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to InfoGamer. In this lesson, I'm going to continue creating our first-person controller using the new input system in Unity. So far, we've created a basic first-person controller that uses the WASD movement and also the look mechanic. Now, if you haven't seen the videos on how to create that basic first-person controller, then I would highly recommend watching those videos first and then coming back to this one later. Or you can go to our website and download that first-person controller for free, and I've left a link in the description below that will take you to where you can download it. While the basic first-person controller is good for things like virtual walkthroughs and tours, the classic first-person controller starts getting into the realms of games such as Halo, Half-Life 2, and even Counter-Strike. Some additional mechanics that the classic first-person controller implements are features such as jumping and crouching. In this video, I'm going to show you how to add the jumping mechanic to our first-person controller. Now, before we begin, make sure that you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you can get updates when we publish new videos. So here I have my first-person controller project open inside of Unity, and the first thing that I'd like to do is demonstrate the jump mechanic that I'll be showing you how to create in this video. So I'm going to click the play button. So here I have my first-person controller in the scene view, and I can move around using my WASD keys. I can also look around in my scene, and when I press the space bar, you can see how my first-person controller now does a jump. And so that's what we're going to be creating in this video. Now, before we get on to creating this jump mechanic, there's a few things that we need to change in the scripts from the last videos. So I'm going to open up my basic first-person controller script in Visual Studio. Now, the first thing that I'd like to do in this script is add a gravity multiplier. This will make it so that we can change the rate at which a player falls due to gravity. To create a gravity multiplier, all we have to do is create a new variable. I've made this a serialized field. It's a private float, and I've called it gravity multiplier. Then what we need to do is scroll down to where we have our player movement function, which I have right here. And inside this function, we should have a line where we're adding gravity to our movement vector 3. So on this line, I have movement plus equals physics.gravity, and then I've added in this part right here, where I'm multiplying physics.gravity by our gravity multiplier. And so if we want our player to fall at the default rate of gravity, then all we have to do is set our gravity multiplier to 1. But if we want our player to fall twice as fast, then we could set it to 2. And if we wanted our player to have reverse gravity, then we could multiply it by -1. Now, the last thing that we need to do inside this script is found in our update function right here, where I've commented out the if statement around our player movement function. Now, the reason why I had this if statement in the first place is because with these conditions, I figured that our game would be more efficient if it didn't have to execute the player movement function when there was no need to move our player. But it turns out that it's a good practice to have gravity being applied to your character at all times, even if your player isn't pressing any keys or if your character's not up in the air. And so I've commented out our if statement, and since I've commented out our if statement, we can also remove the curly braces around our player movement function. And if I want to, I can just remove the if statement entirely. So now with these changes made, I'm going to save this script and go back to Unity. Once we're back inside Unity, I need to explain to you that I've done a little bit of reorganizing in this project for the purpose of these tutorials. And what I've done is I've duplicated all of the files needed for our basic first-person controller, and I renamed them for our classic first-person controller. And the reason why I've done this is so that I can preserve each one of these types of controllers, and then I'll make all of these controllers available on our website to download for free. Now, you don't have to do everything that I've done and duplicate your basic first-person controller. You can just keep working on that one controller. But here you can see I have my file system for the basic FP controller. I have a prefabs folder and I have a scripts folder. I then have this classic FP controller folder, and inside here I have another prefab folder and another scripts folder. And you can see how all the names are different. But now let's get on to creating this jump mechanic. And so I'm going to double click on our input actions file, and that'll open up this window here. Now here you can see that I have two different action maps. One is called basic FP controls and the other is called classic FP controls. When I click on the basic FP controls, you can see that it's exactly the same as what you should be seeing right now. We have our WASD input, and then we have our delta X and our delta Y for the mouse. So we're going to leave our basic FP controls alone, and we're going to create a new action map. And to create a new action map, you can click on this plus sign. And then I've renamed mine to Classic FP Controls. In our Classic FP Controls, you want to add a new action by clicking this plus sign, and I've renamed mine to be Jump. We'll then select our key binding, and over in the Path drop-down menu, we'll search for Space, and you'll select the top option that says Space and then Keyboard. You'll then need to add in this interaction by clicking the plus sign and selecting Press. Once you have all of this, we're then going to click on the Save Asset button, and then we can open up our first-person controller script in Visual Studio. Now this script is my classic FP controller script, but you can keep working in your basic FP controller script. If you want to, you can just rename it to be first-person controller or FP controller or something like that. Now because I renamed all of the files for my classic FP controller script, I also have this variable, which is no longer basic input controller, it's called classic input controller, but you can leave it as basic input controller. And this variable is for my input actions file, which has all of our key bindings. So now let's talk about some of the variables that we'll need for our jump mechanic. So if I scroll down right here, you can see I have a comment that says jump variables. And the first variable is going to be a private float, which I've called isJumping. The next variable is a serialized field so that we can see it in the inspector. It's a private float called jump speed. We could also name this variable something like jump force or jump velocity. It really doesn't matter. Our next variable is a private vector3 called jump vector. And then finally we have our gravity multiplier, which we've already talked about. So once we have all of these variables, the next thing that we need to do is register this script to the input action of pressing the spacebar. And we'll do this in the onEnable function. So right here I have these two lines of code where we're registering to the jump action, which is the same jump action that we have right here in Unity. So on this line of code, I have classic input controls, which yours will probably need to be basic input controls. Then I have .classic FP controls, which is our action map. Then I have .jump, which is our action, then .performed, then plus equals, and then the new callback function, which I've called jump input. On the next line of code, I have classic input controls .classic FP controls .jump .enable. We can then copy both of these lines of code and paste them into our onDisable function. We then need to change this to a minus equals sign. And we need to change this to disable. Now the next thing that we need to do is create this new callback function. And so I'm going to scroll down to where I've created that function. I have it right here. This is a private void function. I've called it jump input. The parameter for this function is an input action.callback context, and I've called it context. Inside this function, the first thing that we need to do is check to see if our character controller component is grounded. Or in other words, that the bottom of our character controller is touching another object. And so I have this if statement where I'm calling myCC.isGrounded. And so if this variable is true, then we'll execute the next line. And on this line, we want to set our isJumping variable equal to context, which is our parameter, .read value, and we're looking for a float. This will give us a value such as 1 when we press down on the spacebar and 0 when we lift up. And we only want our players to jump if they're not currently up in the air. Once we've created this function, we then want to scroll up to our player movement function, which I have right here. And this segment of code is where I'm doing my jump mechanic. And so right after we add gravity to our movement vector 3, I have this if statement where I'm checking to see if our character controller is grounded. So I have if myCC.isGrounded. We then want to check for the player input. And so I have this if statement where I'm checking to see if isJumping is greater than 0. Now isJumping is the variable that we're setting in our jump input function, and we're reading it from the event action when a player presses the spacebar. So if we are pressing the spacebar, then we want to set the y value of our jump vector, and we're going to set it equal to our jump speed. Then on the next line of code, we essentially want to set isJumping equal to false, and so I have isJumping equals 0. Now if our character controller is not grounded, or in other words it's up in the air, then we want to subtract gravity from our jump vector. So I have this else statement, and inside this else statement I have jump vector, then plus equals, and I have plus equals because gravity is going to be negative. So then I have physics.gravity, and I'm multiplying it by our gravity multiplier, and then I'm multiplying it by time.delta time. So now that we have the values of our jump vector set up, it's time to add our jump vector to our movement vector 3. And so outside my else statement, I have this movement plus equals and then jump vector. Now the next thing that we need to do is make sure that all three parts of our movement vector 3 have been multiplied by time.delta time. So up above on these two lines of code where we're setting the x and the z coordinates of our movement vector 3, I used to have it being multiplied by time.delta time, but I removed that, and down here I'm just multiplying all three parts of our movement vector 3 by time.delta time. So I have movement and then times equals time.delta time. And so we're doing this instead of multiplying these two lines of code by time.delta time. Now after this, our movement vector 3 is ready to be applied to our character controller. And so on this last line of code of this function, I have mycc.move, and I'm passing in the movement vector 3 as the parameter. After all of this, we can then save our script and go back to Unity. Once we're back in Unity, we need to select our first-person controller game object, and then in the inspector we need to set the jump speed and the gravity multiplier. Right now I have the jump speed set to 15, and then I have the gravity multiplier set to 1. Now let's go ahead and test this project one more time. So I'm going to click the play button. Here you can see I can walk around, I can look around, and I can jump by pressing the spacebar. And I can only jump once I've touched the ground. I can't do a double jump or anything like that. Now let's play around with our jump speed and our gravity multiplier. So let's maybe set our jump speed to something like 100. There you can see I can jump really high. And I'm still going. And now I'm falling. So slow. Maybe while I'm falling I can set the gravity modifier. Oh, okay. Now let's set the gravity modifier and see how much faster I hit the ground. So I'll set it to 5. There you can see I'm not jumping as high as I did before, and I'm falling quite a bit faster. Now let's set the gravity multiplier to something like -1. There we go, I'm floating away. Goodbye, world. Goodbye. Better bring myself back down to Earth. Here we go. Coming in hot. Boom. That was like Apex Legends right there. No fall damage. Alright, so that's everything that we're going to cover in this lesson on how to add a jump mechanic to your first-person controller. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and that you found it to be informational. If you did, make sure that you give it a thumbs up. Leave any questions you have in the comments below or join our Discord server. And finally, make sure that you subscribe to our channel so you can be up to date on all our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.